3 paintings depicting philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. And this is his version of medicine. And we see this kind of creepy, monstrous, but rather beautiful scene where the Greek goddess of medicine is here, Hygeia, and then there's just this clouds of human forms emerging up from her. And they range from just figures of men and women to skeletons and death's heads, and the nude, which, what was shocking, wait a sec, that's not the one anyway, let's see if I, yes, that's the one I'm looking for. What was shocking and offensive to the public was things like the presence of pubic hair on the nude. And so you can see all these Art Nouveau qualities and things, but it's almost like he's creating a grouping of monsters, and it's supposed to be medicine, and he's created this kind of dream or nightmarish kind of grouping, doing things that hadn't been done before, like presenting the nude in this very unconventional way. Of course, he's most famous for his painting of the Kiss, but the Kiss actually emerges or develops out of this work. This was part of a big kind of mural grouping dedicated to Beethoven. And this particular section depicts the Heavenly Choir. And again, you can see the Art Nouveau aspects to it, where we've got these large flat areas of patterning and design, and then there's sort of the arabesques and so on. And then here is the figure of the Kiss. This was a kind of meant to be a visualization of the Ode to Joy, which was by Schiller, but which inspired the end of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So it has a musical aspect to it too. It's kind of visual music. Here is Klimt's famous The Kiss, and you can see how it sort of operates within the context of this Art Nouveau style. Very unconventional in terms of the fact that these are flattened out, highly decorative shapes and patterns, and yet we have these very naturalistic representations of the heads and the hands, so combining the modern and the traditional, but using things like a lot of gold. And what the gold does is it's almost a resurrection of the idea of the Byzantine icon, like a religious image. It looks like jewels and gold, but applying it to a subject like the Kiss, and so giving almost a kind of sacred quality to this highly erotic image. So really unconventional, but really, really beautiful, appealing to the senses. Ferdinand Hodler was also an exhibitor at the Vienna Secession. And he started out as a naturalist painter, but then his work moved into the realm of symbolism. And in this one, this is simply called Night. And it looks, at first glance, it's just like a natural scene, but it's really strange because it's a bunch of people sleeping. And it's almost like Fuseli's The Nightmare. It's this guy, which is a self-portrait of the artist, who's being woken up by the figure of death. And so what a nightmare. Again, the idea of dreams and nightmares, but also with that Freudian overlay where Freud believed in the primary phenomena of the sexual instinct, but also the death instinct, thanatos. And so what's happening in the mind, essentially, is what this is about. Wrestling with these instinctual drives. Edvard Munch, Norwegian artist, showed with the Berlin Secession. So again, these secession groups are all groups that are breaking away from the conservative traditions. And his work deals with issues of life and death and is expressive of his profound mental anguish, which was a reaction to many family tragedies and personal disappointments that he endured. In his early life, he experienced terrible loss. The death of his sister, which is pictured here, and his mother. He was very unlucky in love. He had a very cold father. His upbringing was very disturbing, and this comes out in his painting. You can just feel the emotion attached to this, where his sister is on her deathbed, and we've got just these arbitrary colors, this very emotive brush. It just shows a kind of internal anguish that is just comes out onto the canvas. It's similar in many ways to Van Gogh, the idea of the expressive quality, but where Van Gogh is kind of more exuberant, Munch it shows his inner turmoil and inner anguish. This is an important work by Munch called The Dance of Life, and in it he explores the themes of sexuality, phases of life, and it's basically about love and the idea of the procreation and how these can ward off mortality and death. So the couple at the center, it's the dance of life. They are embroiled together in a kind of pose of sexual energy and passion. The woman at the left in white is innocence, the far right is experience, and read together, it's the three phases of life: youth, maturity, and old age. And it's the dance that is keeping death at bay. So these are, again, this is all about his kind of inner thoughts and fears, the things that hold him. His most famous work, The Scream, visualizes the experience of extreme mental anguish. This is what he described, what this painting was about. He says, "I was walking along the road with two friends. The sun was setting. I felt a breath of melancholy. Suddenly the sky turned blood red. I stopped and leaned against the railing, deathly tired, looking out across the flaming clouds that hung like blood and a sword over the blue-black fjord and town. My friends walked on. I stood there, trembling with fear, and I sensed a great, infinite scream pass through nature." So this is an anxiety attack, basically. But what he's doing is presenting this psychological anguish in a completely new means for painting. And it's amazing. We've seen anguish. We've seen distraught individuals before. You look at the Oath of the Horatii, on the far right, the women are completely distraught, but they're painted in a way that situates us as the calm onlooker who, from a distance, observes this kind of mental anguish. And even with Géricault, his portraits of the insane, we sense the inner anguish conveyed through the features of the figures, their expression, and we're moved. We're very much moved, much more than we are by David's women. We sense the humanity of this figure. But his mindset doesn't extend to the environment. So there's that sense of a kind of a detached psyche. Whereas with Munch, the total environment becomes the psychological vehicle for revealing his psychic state. So his mental state is fused with his surroundings. And it is a powerfully evocative piece. And you can see all of the new elements coming together in this, the extreme perspective, the angling, the paint straight out of the tube, arbitrary colors, the very harsh brush stroke, and all of it now being used to convey a psychology.
One of the things about the screen that I thought was cool when I was researching this
Yeah.
was that it's painted on cardboard, and there's also crayon over top of the paint.
Oh, is that crayon?
Those scribbles, those are crayon.
Yeah, that's really wild. And that's like the whole idea of opening up the possibilities of different media, which becomes big for the 20th century. That's interesting. So, 1900, the Paris International Exposition. A lot of changes had taken place. There are women artists included who are being exhibited, artists of color, African American and Japanese. Naturalism remains the style though, and this is a work by Joaquim Sorolla y Bastida called Sewing the Sail. It was a typical of the works presented there. But we see, developments in terms of social change. But it's interesting because this naturalism is something that had such a hold on the artistic world of Europe, and it's what the artists of the 20th century will rebel against, building on the legacy of Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, and Seurat. And so your book kind of ends with these two portraits, one by a very conservative artist, John Singer Sargent, who is doing a family portrait in a very kind of traditional way. The wealthy patron has commissioned the art to reflect their status and elegance. And you can see that it's presented in a way that is naturalistic. There's a little bit of impressionism in there as well, which is very flattering. And we sort of see some of the serpentine forms that are popular with the Art Nouveau, but just a little bit. By and large, anything that's unconventional is just added to make the portrait look all the more flattering. And then a portrait done right about the same time is by the very young Pablo Picasso. And it's not a commissioned portrait. It's a portrait that draws on the 19th century ideas of flattening out the forms, of being real and acknowledging the flatness of the canvas, using the harsh outline, having a sense of a kind of expressive quality, and so embracing unconventional sources as well. And so that's where it stands at the threshold of the 20th century. We have these avant-garde artists like Picasso who will build on the ideas of people like Cézanne. We'll see very quickly by 1905 a group called the Fauves, led by Matisse, who will take the lessons of Van Gogh and Gauguin in a certain direction. And then the symbolist thought will be developed by the Surrealists. And so in the 20th century, you've got these kind of three different avenues that have built on the 19th century, and that's where modern art gets taken, and it moves right through the century until the late 60s, kind of bringing those three different threads of investigation to fruition. And if you want to learn more about that, take the Modern Art course in January. So that's it. I'm done for the lecture, but let's just leave early, and so next week, come prepared to do a review. And as I said, I will also pare down the works list. I'll get rid of some of the works so you won't have as many to study. We'll review. So it's going to be everything from after the midterm. So it's a good idea to review it before you come in if you have any questions. And the exam, again, is December 7th, so we get to review next week, and then boom, you're going to be ready for the exam on the Wednesday. Okay, have a great rest of the week.